Louise Welsh, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
What compels you as a writer?
Some days, I've got to be honest, it's the mortgage. Some days I don't feel compelled at all. I'm somebody who, I do enjoy the process of writing sometimes. A lot of the time I don't, actually. I think it's a strange thing. I feel bad if I don't do it, and I feel better for having done it. I don't want to give the impression that I'm a tortured artist. You can see me, I'm not tortured at all. But it's a strange thing. I don't know why I want to write. Beats having a real job.
Often writers talk about aspects of their early childhood that recur in their writing. Are you aware of elements of your own upbringing that have floated to the surface or reverberated in your own work?
That's an interesting question, actually. I certainly have enjoyed reading since I was a child, so that love of literature, I guess, is a constant. Biographically, I'm not sure about concerns that have come up from when I was a child. I think there's a lot of homelessness in my books, and while we weren't homeless as children, well, we were actually for a while, but you were never actually homeless. You were always staying with somebody, you know. So I don't know if that's
were you
something.
A forces child?
Yeah, I was, and I travelled a lot as a young child and moved school a lot and all of these things. But it's tempting to say, oh well, I was always an outsider. I think everybody feels like that, don't they? I think you'd be hard pushed to find any child that said, I feel completely understood and accepted by my parents and my peers in society. So, yeah, maybe that sense of place, that moving around thing is part of it. But I'm very, don't know, love of literature.
Good. Like me, you're a historian, or I should say, am a historian. What benefits do you think training in history has given you personally as a writer?
Well, I did a degree in history, but I think my lecturers would laugh if they heard you describing me as a historian. But I think I tend to always have a historical analysis of things. It seems to be the way in which I can understand the world is by looking historically. When I want to understand something, I always think, well, okay, I'll read back and see how that happened. And sometimes it doesn't eliminate things at all, but my first impulse is always to look into the past. And of course I worked with antiques, I worked with second-hand books, and I think that connection to the past is something that's really important to me. I like having old things around. I think part of what you realise reading voices from history, all these diaries and papers and accounts that we have, what you realise is that people are pretty much the same as they always were, that we're motivated by the same things, and we're motivated by love, by greed, insecurities, all of that kind of thing. And I think perhaps that should be depressing, I don't know, but I somehow find it reassuring. We're perhaps no better than our ancestors, but we're no worse. I think when people talk about how dreadful the world has become, well, the world is a dreadful and a fantastic place, and it's always been a dreadful and a fantastic place.
Excellent. Can you talk about how the story at the centre of the cutting room developed in your imagination? How much of it did you have before you started kind of really getting down to writing a novel?
Yeah, well, The Cutting Room was my first book, of course, and I think you put a lot of things into your first book, ideas that you've been thinking about since you were a child, perhaps. The actual story, I think, came partly from my work as a second-hand bookseller. Certainly that setting did, that world was a world that I occupied. Though maybe I painted it in quite bright colours, I don't know. But the idea of somebody finding something horrible inside a house and then wondering, was it real? Was it authentic? I guess came from that world. And I did know we were always finding pornography. It's very few houses that have absolutely no porn in them. I discovered, I was quite young then, I was quite shocked to discover this. I even found some naughty stuff in a convent once. So maybe you would expect to find that, I don't know. But I did know a bookseller who had gone to clear a house, and when he'd arrived, the two sisters and a brother had lived together, and the two sisters were burning. They were having a bonfire outside, and they discovered all of his pornography, and it was a fabulous collection apparently. And he had very early things that were actually worth quite a lot of money. And my friend had said, "Oh my goodness, you could get like £300 for one of these photos." And the old ladies immediately started to put out the flames so that they could get the pornography and sell it, because they realised it had slightly more value than they thought. So I guess that these stories that you hear feed into fiction. When I actually managed to sell the cutting room on the first 30,000 words. And at that point, when I started, I had the character, I had Rilke's voice, I guess, and I had the premise, I had the what if. I didn't actually know the ending, and I think perhaps that shows in the book as well. I think no book is perfect. You try your best, but as I go on now, I do try to plan more, and I do try to structure things more. And I guess that's part of what you want to do as a writer. You want to try and improve. You want to try and get better. There doesn't seem much point otherwise.
And in terms of those initial 30,000 words, did those change particularly, as you got further into the project, or did they stay fairly much as they had been written?
I edit a lot. I do edit a lot. I'm somebody who edits as they go along, and I wish I didn't do that. I wish I could just fire onto the page and then come back and rewrite it and make it sharper and more fashioned, more crafted. I think the second that seems a more logical way to do things, and yet I don't seem to be able to do that. I have to do it quite slowly and edit as I go along. So I guess when I finally handed it in, I think those early chapters really were pretty worked by that time, because I'd changed so much in the process.
Good. How aware were you of other writers' styles when you were writing The Cutting Room, and to what extent did you allow them to influence you, if at all?
I think that's a difficult question, because there are so many influences going on in our unconscious, and I'm certainly, I read so much, and I've read so much since so it's almost like a problem how much I read. It's a little addiction that I have. So I certainly didn't consciously go out to follow somebody's style. But after saying that, of course, it isn't a novel where I was consciously thinking about genre, and I was thinking about the Gothic more than the crime genre, although obviously I was aware of that and aware of those conventions as well. So I think that necessarily perhaps imposes things on your style. And this idea of the lonely man who walks alone and has his own particular moral code, which may not necessarily fit with the moral code of the rest of society, but to which he nevertheless sticks. I think all of that will do things to your style. And I think there's perhaps a romantic element to it as well. I think at that point I was reading a lot of romantics. I was very interested in Byron and Shelley, and I was also, I think, reading a lot of Rambo for some reason. I'm not sure why at that point. But I don't think that I have that I've taken on Byron's style, which is maybe unfortunate actually. I might benefit from it.
Not at all.